Okay, so it all has to do with this mask. Perhaps you've heard of it before. We're going to talk about it. It's a central find that kind of changes everything that we think we know about Susita, and things are changing all the time because there's a big dig going on there now, and we're in the middle of it. We, the greater we, I have not dug there, but every year they have the Yom Sikum, a day of kind of like a summary of everything that's happened that year, and it's always fascinating. So even though it hasn't officially opened, you can visit, and as long as it's not too hot of a day, it's a wonderful place to visit. I, of course, recommend going up there. And, of course, the best information source about the dig that's going on there is the Hippos Susita website that's run by the University of Haifa Department of Archaeology, and the chief archaeologist, Michael Eisenberg, who writes a lot. So there's the website has articles that have been written. It sells books that have been written about Susita, but it's too expensive for me to buy. But the articles are really good. And there's great graphics, including 3D imagery and all that kind of stuff. So I highly suggest, for those who want to learn more about Susita, because it's constantly changing, to visit the website, and also to come, for those who it's not too big of a schlep, to come to the end of year summary that Michael Eisenberg always gives. And there's also, for those guides who are among us, although this wasn't specifically, this class wasn't geared to guides, but for those guides who are here, there are, I saw a number of Ishtalmuyot, including one on November 3rd, that is going to be given by the School of Tourism, November 3rd, in Susita. So it's also a way that I kind of try to keep up to date, although it's very hard because they're constantly finding new things, and the story of Susita is changing. So let's talk a little bit about Susita. For those who want to know where we're talking about, we're taking our classic CIA map that we use every week, and here at the bottom is Susita right next to Engev. You can see that the armistice line, those who were with us last week, was drawn right around Susita, because the ceasefire that went into effect, and then the line that was subsequently drawn, was one day after the people of Susita were there. So it's officially, according to, well, I guess it depends who you ask, part of the state of Israel since 1948. And just to give another place that people know about is Banyas, that we'll be mentioning. It's up here in the northern part of the Golan. So the red dot in the north is Banyas, the red dot in the south is Susita. And just a quick little look, very, very close to the Kinneret. You can see it when you drive on Road 98, right next, or whatever road that is, next to Engev, 92, 90 something. And it just looms over the kibbutz, as we talked about.
I think it's 92.
92, thank you. So it goes, this road, you can, right before Engev, there's a road that goes to the right and goes up to Susita, for those who want to visit. Susita's history is very complicated, and the big question I always ask after hearing like the main dates is, who's in charge today? The city went from hand to hand from so many different peoples that took a big interest in it and made it a city, a capital city, a small city, a fort. And just to give, I would say, I'm going to talk very quickly about the history of Susita. Then we'll talk about Susita and Jewish literature, just a few things. Then we'll talk about Pan in Susita, and Pan in general. What's the connection between the two places? And then we'll take a Jewish look at Pan and goats in general. And in the end, we'll finish off with just a few words about what we can learn. What can monotheists learn after visiting a pagan site? Because it is, in my opinion, very, very fascinating, and actually very connected to Judaism in the end. So a quick, I'm talking about 2 minutes of history. Susita started in the Greek period when Hellenism came to the land of Israel. Alexander the Great, of course, but when he died, his 1-year-old son wasn't deemed fit to rule the world. So 4 generals took over. 2 of them stayed in the general area of Europe, and I can't pronounce their names anyway. And the Middle East, our area, was kind of like split up into 2. In the south was Ptolemy, and to the east was Seleucus, and they kind of split the Middle East between them. You can see that they meet pretty much where the land of Israel is, and that often happens that we're kind of on the middle of the chessboard that people are trying to, that they fight their wars over. So in the beginning, Ptolemy, who's, after he died, now Ptolemy and Seleucus were friends, but their kids, when they had their kids were pretty big enemies. And these people, as often happens when, after World War I and World War II, the folks who won split the area between them, and then they became from friends to frenemies to enemies. And Ptolemy had the capital was in Alexandria and ruled pretty much over Egypt and North Africa. And Seleucus had the Seleucids had their capital over here in Antioch, which is right up here, southern Turkey, northern Syria. And at the time, this whole area was under the Seleucids. So in the beginning, the Ptolemies were the first to start with Susita. They called it Hippos. And this is just a quick timeline so we can have a framework to work around. So somewhere in the 3rd century, the fort was built by the Ptolemies. But then in 200, something very important happened in Banyas, of all places. The little red dot that we showed in the north that everybody here, I'm sure, has been to. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies meet in Banyas, which is pretty much near the border of their territories, and had a very important war, after which the Ptolemies pushed back into Egypt and the Seleucids took over the entire area. And they went about 50 years later to the fort built by the Ptolemies, and they made it into a big city with thousands of people, of course, calling it Antiochia Hippos. And the question is, why? What does this place have to do with the horse? We can only guess. The most educated guess, apparently, thanks to a number of coins that were minted at the time, is that the soldiers who built the fort and also the ones who came afterwards were from the cavalry, and therefore they called it Hippos, kind of to give honor to their horses. There are other theories. For instance, if you're north of Susita, like at the Mitzpe Ophir, and you're looking south, I do have to say, so after somebody pointed out to me, Susita really looks like the head of a horse. I mean, literally looks like the head of a horse. It's very convincing, but of course, we don't really have another example of that. And the coin story sounds a little more something that we can accept, and that of course historians talk about. So it was called that of the horse, Hippos, and in Hebrew, Susita. 50 years later, well, actually 25 years later, approximately, the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans come on the scene, and we have independence in the land of Israel. And 25 years after that, Alexander Yanai, who, according to Josephus, starts moving north and capturing areas, and he captures what was Hippos, calls it Susita, and there's a Jewish community there. We don't really, apparently there's a Jewish majority with a pagan minority. But that doesn't last for more than 40 years because the Romans come in and Pompey captures the entire area, including our country, and of course, Susita itself. The Hasmoneans are kicked out. The Jews are persecuted. Of course, the pagans who are living there are relieved, and it becomes part of the huge area, Provincia Syria, and the Decapolis is formed. The Decapolis is a group of 10 cities, all pretty much in the same area, mainly in today's Jordan and Syria. We have one on our side of the Jordan called Bet-Shan. We have Susita. On the other side of the river from Susita is Gader, Hamat Gader, or the hot springs of the city of the Gader, which is up on top. And a lot of people who visit Jordan visit Gerasa, Jerash, and it wasn't a league like the Delphi League, but rather it was 10 cities that all had institutions that were connected to the Hellenistic culture. Some of those institutions are a theater, a bathhouse, a temple, and a cultic area. And they also had an area where they gave homage to the emperor, and we'll see that later. Then Herod comes around. Of course, he is the king of the Jews. The Romans believe in him, and they actually take Susita out of Provincia Syria and give it to Herod. So Jews then are back in Susita and doing okay, but when he dies, the Romans don't trust his kids or anybody else who's ruling. They take Susita away and put it back in Provincia Syria. You can imagine the pagans who are living in Susita are like, oh, okay. And at this time, as soon as it becomes part of that province, the people of Hippos start persecuting the Jewish population, especially when the Great Revolt comes around in 66. And it's so bad that they send a message to the Jews of Tiberias and Migdal, who come across the lake and try to attack Susita, but unsuccessfully. And then about 70 years later, after the second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, they start building it up again. Christianity comes in, it becomes a big Christian city. There's an earthquake, it never really bounces back, although they rebuild it a little bit. And in the 8th century, we don't hear about the city anymore, and it becomes buried. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the history of this city, which, as you can tell, if we have to sum up this first section, it would be, what's going on here? This place is going back and forth, and therefore, when you have a group that takes over, you often will find that people who are upset or are happy that the other folks aren't there will build on top and sometimes destroy the edifices of the people who were there before. Therefore, we have not yet found, the greater we, not me, but the archaeologists have yet to find really anything seriously Jewish in Susita. But I think it's a matter of time, and I'm optimistic. Because otherwise a lot of Jewish groups won't go, and I think there's a lot to learn here. So this is a beautiful view in the winter, of course, looking from the Kinneret towards the east. And for those who were with us last week, this is the riverbed that the folks of Engev took in order to come up. They went across the saddle and attacked from the Syrian side, as opposed to coming up from the Israel side, and that's how they were able to surprise them. But you see, you can't really come up these steep, you really have to come up, there's only one way to, except for this road, which is new, relatively. This saddle, this is what the area we're gonna really talk about today. And here we are looking at, towards the Kinneret. It's beautiful even in the summer, as long as there's not a heat wave. The place is incredible, there's a great view. I think it's gonna be one of the most popular sites in the future. So if we're going to talk about being pagan, one of the things that you did after the Romans already conquered, right after Pompey was here, after 63, before the Common Era, is that all the cities of the Decapolis had a calibe. Calibe is a place that you have a statue or an idol of the emperor, and you pray to the emperor. The emperor is a divinity, and this is where it happened. In the beginning, they thought this would be a nymphaeon, which would be a fountain where water would come through, but then they realized, when comparing also with other cities of the Decapolis, that this is something else. And at the bottom is, in another city of the Decapolis, this is the archaeologist's reconstruction. And apparently this is from the time of Hadrian, so we can imagine the statue of Hadrian being here, and anybody coming into the city, and anybody going to the main area to get water from the main huge cistern that's right next to this place would pay homage and bow down or say prayers for the divine emperor. So that was also part of being a pagan in Susita. And another thing is burial, okay? So this is the path, the only way that people used to be able to get to Susita. And by the way, this is also, if we go talk about last week, those who were with us, when they stormed Susita from the Syrian side, they had no choice but to run on this path. Now, if the Syrians had been serious and they had one guy here with a machine gun, he could have mowed down everybody coming here, and they knew that. So they ran in the darkness shooting, but they didn't expect it from here. They were expecting them to come from the Israel side. So this is actually the ancient saddle, as we call it in English and Hebrew, the entrance to the city. Therefore, it can be very well defended. You can't really surprise the city. I mean, one by one you could, but an army couldn't. And so you pretty much have to come here, and then you know you're going to have a moat, not a moat like in Europe with water, but a ditch, which is right here. And you can see it. There's a ditch that they, a deep ditch of a few meters deep. And the archaeologists believe that there was a wooden bridge there that could be pulled up, just like in the movies when somebody wants to enter a medieval castle. This was way before medieval. And what's interesting is that not only is this a defensive spot, but it also is the barrier between the holy and the profane in pagan eyes. There is definitely a parallel in Judaism. You don't bury in the city, you bury outside. And that's the necropolis, that's out there. Once you get in the city, you don't bury. So this ditch actually is also the barrier between the city of the living and the city of the dead. And they have now discovered scores. This entire area here is a huge mausoleum, necropolis of incredibly wealthy people who bought at top dollar the best real estate for dying, with a great view. And it cost a lot of money. And apparently, according to the archaeologists, this was a way for the city to make money. Just an idea there. It still happens today all over the world. And the only problem is the only people who could afford to be buried here were very, very wealthy. The folks who couldn't afford it got tossed into a cave on the other side of the riverbed. So these are some of the most incredible grave sites. And one of them, here's a 3D picture that they made. This is where you park your car. There's room for about 20 cars there. There will be in the future a big parking lot here, so it'll be safe. And here's the ditch. You can see that it's a serious incision here. And here's where life is, and here's where death is, the mausoleum, the necropolis. And this is what they found. People were so wealthy that they actually chiseled out the face of the people who were buried there. So we can take a look at this and guess that this is what this guy looked like. It looks like he's got a bit of a unibrow going there, and his eyes are deep. Maybe it was towards the end of his life. He doesn't look like he's really full of vitality here. But now you wouldn't find this in ancient times in a Jewish grave. It just wasn't done. A graven image. Today, it's a little different. By the way, it's a fascinating subject that we won't go into. I just want to mention it, that if you go into Israeli graveyards today, ever since the Aliyah of Jews from the former Soviet Union, you will find a lot of depictions and photos that have been printed on stone so that people can see or remember what their loved ones look like. Not really a Jewish tradition, not necessarily against Jewish tradition, but this is definitely something that would be very pagan in ancient times. So those are two things that pagans would do, and that's what we could say was pagan in Susita until 2015. In 2015, there was a huge discovery, and they found a propylium. Propylium is a 3-gate monumental entrance to a cultic site. Now, they had felt, Michael Eisenberg especially, because it was a city of the Decapolis, and because it has a tradition also in literary sources of being a big area of pagan ritual, there was only a matter of time until they could find the cultic area. And they have found here since then a number of things: a pool, a bathhouse, a number of rooms, and in the back, even a theater. And this is where they found the famous mask. You can see here they superimposed it. This is where they found it. And that brings us to what was perhaps the biggest archaeological discovery in the world in 2015. This is the man, Alexander Yermolin, Dr. Alexander Yermolin, who is head of the lab of conservation at the University of Haifa Department of Archaeology. So he was working here with his metal detector, and it started going beep, beep, beep. You can see here the metal detector right behind him on the left. And he finds this mask. And of course, everybody gets to take a picture with it. This is Michael Eisenberg with the picture, and they dust it off, and you can see a horn here up on the left. There's supposed to be another one here. Yeah, you kind of see it. And he's got a beard here, and his mouth is in kind of terror. And the big question here is this just like a mask of a satyr, or is it Pan? And it turns out that after clearing it off, this is what it looks like. It's bronze. It's incredibly beautiful. A little personal story. I got to hold this once because when in 2015 at the end, Michael Eisenberg came to Katsrin in the Golan to give a short talk of 20 minutes about this find, and he brought the mask with him. So right before he talked, it was lunchtime. Everybody went out to eat lunch. I wanted to do some emails. I was sitting there in the auditorium with my laptop doing some emails, and then he says, "Can you help me here for a sec?" So I was like, "What, me? Yeah, I need your help here. This is really heavy." And so, can you hold this for a moment? He says, "Now, this is worth like between $1 and $3 million. So like, don't drop it." And it was pretty heavy. I mean, it's 5 kilo for a mask. I mean, you'd think it would be light, because at first, I thought it maybe was a theater mask. It was just way too heavy to hold. And they had cleaned it off. Dr. Yermolin was the man who cleaned it off. And it's 98% copper. It's incredibly powerful. Like if, as Jews and as monotheists, we kind of laugh, those stupid pagans, how could they be so stupid to bow down to idols? You hold this mask in your hand, I can tell you, there is something there that can grab you. It's very, very, it's bigger than a human face. It's powerful. Not that I had any feelings that I was gonna, bow down to it or anything, but it is something, there's something there. There are other masks that they had found that were heavy. This is made out of stone from Pompeii, also Pan. You can see the 2 horns here and the beard and the mouth looking in terror. But they haven't ever found a bronze one yet, and not one this big. It was a very big discovery. And other masks that aren't theater masks, but rather ornamental masks. This is also found in Italy, also Pan. You can see the horns that are here are actually places for the handle of a pot that had to do with bringing offerings. And these are 3 terracotta masks that they found, 2 of them in Pompeii. This on the left is apparently connected to Dionysius, god of wine and other stuff. So there was a question, was this mask perhaps part of a water spout? And the answer was no way, because it's too expensive to have just as a water spout. Make it out of terracotta or out of stone or even marble, but not bronze, too heavy. Could it be a theater mask? No way. And so it turns out that the theory today is that it is a medallion that was hung in that area, in the cultic area. And that brings us to Pan himself. So again, this happened about 5 years ago. And and today you can't see it here. I think it's in Haifa in the museum. So it's called, what we were looking at is called an oscilla, an oscillum, plural oscilla. These are masks. One of them, for instance, has a place for a hook on the back to hang up. And these would be hung up on the walls. It would be part of the cultic experience when you go in and worship Pan. So just a few things about Pan himself. According to Greek mythology, Pan was born of the god. There's about 25 different explanations of how Pan was born, but the accepted tradition from the hymn to Pan, which is attributed to Homer, is that he was born from a god Hermes and Hermes and a nymph Penelope. And when he was born, Penelope thought that it would be just a normal child, but it turns out that he was born with a beard and very hairy legs, and he was half goat and half human. The nurse screamed, ran away. The mother screamed, ran away. Hermes zoomed in, and the kid was laughing, okay? So like this pleased him. So Hermes zooms in, takes the baby, and goes back to Olympus and presents it before all the gods, and they're really, really happy with him. And they all laugh, and there's this great, spiritual connection between them. And then he goes to live in a place called Arcadia, which is like Garden of Eden. And this is a painting, obviously not from the time of the Greeks. This is a man in the 1800s who drew it in England, but still, this is what you can imagine. I just want you to take a look at this, because when we compare it to what we have in Israel, it's very, very similar. There's a little waterfall here, a lot of water, a lot of woods, a lot of pasture, and here it looks like there's a cave or a grotto, because that was always something that had to do with Pan. So he's part beast, he's part god, and the most important thing that I ever read about Pan was written by a Swiss historian and expert in world religions, who wrote the following: the hymn to Pan that tells us about the half beast, half human, who was a god, seems to teach us, listen carefully, that if we refuse the beast in ourselves, we will never know to resemble a god. I want to read that again. This is the most important sentence, in my opinion, that has to do with paganism. The hymn seems to teach us that if we refuse the beast in ourselves, we will never know to resemble a god. In other words, we're being encouraged as a pagan to let the beasts go forth. And that is the way of being holy. That's a way to rise to holiness, is by letting the beast out. I mean, it's totally antithetical to everything that we have, and that's why I think it's so fascinating. But it's, as it were, justification for doing every single urge that comes to your mind. Arcadia is a place that had all these things that have to do with the worship of Pan. Pan is in charge of shepherding. He's a shepherd himself. He's in charge of fertility, abundance. He was a master piper, of course, with the pan flute. He loved to dance. His gifts to mankind were laughter, good humor, and sexual vitality. And of course, he could cause terror and panic and pandemonium, which his name is the source of those ideas. However, he wasn't a very nice fellow, or beast, or whatever you want to call him, because if he felt like taking one of the nymphs and doing whatever he wanted with her, he didn't ask. In other words, rape was okay, because if that's what you feel like at the moment, that's what you do. So he tried to rape Echo. She refused, and he flew into rage, because that's what he felt like doing at the time. And so he drove men who were in the fields there into madness. They came and tore up Echo into shreds, and that's why, they scattered parts of her singing body all over the world, and that's why wherever you go, you can hear Echo. And of course, another important story, the famous Battle of Marathon, with the Persians tried to capture the Greeks. According to Greek mythology, it was Pan who came and helped by creating panic along the Persian soldiers. And after that battle, he became a big deity in Athens, and they dedicated a small natural cave to him. Let's take a look at it. It's right here. This is the Acropolis on top of Athens. Never been there, but this is a picture of the Acropolis on top, and underneath it, this is the cave of Pan. And after the Battle of Marathon, this became a place where, if you wanted to give homage, right, to pay homage and worship the god Pan, this is where you went. And you would, so the worship, actually, it was I've never been to one of these parties, but I've always wondered what they were like. The rave parties that last 24 hours, you know, when I was in school, we didn't have those. But I mean, we had fraternities, which was crazy enough, but we didn't have 24-hour stuff. So you would go with your friends, your loved ones, whatever that means to you, right? With laughter and good humor and clapping and dancing, and you'd get to a cave and you would worship a 24-hour ritual that included sacrificing a goat, having a communal meal, having drunken parties, orgies, etc., and an all-night vigil. It included prayer, and before you would put your gifts to God in it could be an idol, it could be offerings, then you would start with the words, "Dear nymphs, dear Pan," because these were dear gods, and they would help people rise to holiness. I mean, it's hard not to laugh when saying that, but that was the tradition. So let's move on to the what we knew until Susita was, of course, banyas. And here we have, if you remember the picture, a few pictures ago, that man in England painted, we've got the same thing. We've got a little waterfall here, and we've got the cave, and we've got the temples to Pan in Banyas, which fascinatingly enough, it's the same place where the Greeks fought the Greeks, that famous battle in 200 before the Common Era. Here are some of the coins from Banyas that were found in the dig there. You can see the pan flute. You can see the cane. He's always with the cane, like a shepherd's cane. And down below, we have we have goats, and they seem to be sitting, standing, perhaps dancing. This is a sign of a cave, and this brings us to, this is an aerial photo of the cultic area of Banyas. Okay, now at first it was not a city, it was a cultic site. And remember, Pan is not worshipped in the city, but outside. And here you can see the cave, according to tradition. This is where the Jordan starts. What a better place to have a cultic site to the god Pan. And here on the right are what is left of a number of temples. And anybody who goes to Banyas, you can see the sign there. These are the temples. This was a temple that had no back, because the back of the temple was the cave itself, and you would have an offering to the gods by throwing a goat into the water. If it fell in or didn't fall in, was a sign that it was accepted or not. Obviously, you don't have to be a geologist to realize that this is actually the end of Mount Hermon, and all that snow that's melting is coming out and making the Banyas River, which in the end becomes the Jordan. But look what's going on over here. We've got goats dancing, because according to the archaeologists who took a look, now this is a theory, okay, it hasn't been proven yet, but according to the archaeologists, thanks to that coin and this temple here, this is a place called the Temple of the Dancing Goats, okay? And dancing goats, in other words, these were trained goats that would dance, and it would be part of the Pan worship. You can imagine here, 24 hours? I don't have enough time. I got so much stuff to do here. 24 hours isn't enough. There's a temple of Zeus and a temple of Nemesis. There's so much going on here. And I've got dancing goats. Over here, this area, they found an area where you can see it today. There's little cubbies, shelves, and there they found over 900 goat bones. Now, because none of the bones were cut, they imagine that they were not sacrificed, and because all the bones were like set in a certain way, they weren't eaten. So his theory is that if you were a dancing goat, which of course as a goat would probably be a pretty good honor, then when you died, you got to be buried in the Temple of the Dancing Goats. Like what? It's like the guy who pays a lot of money and gets to be buried right outside in the cool mausoleum at the entrance to Susita. Here, I'm a goat, like no goat gets to where I have gotten. So according to this theory, which is well-based and it's accepted today, although it's not fact, it's a theory, that this was a temple that had dancing goats. You would do whatever you do there. I don't want to go into it. There's some crazy things that they did there. And over here, when you finished as a goat, you finished your life, you died, then you got to be buried in that temple. So we can imagine that perhaps what happened at Banyas, a mirror image of things may have happened at Susita, and only time will tell us if that is true. So this is a picture which is a rabbit and a rooster. This has to do with something called the Eshedai, okay? And it's a Greek word that means the edges. Pan did not rule in the cities. He ruled in the edges, the liminal zone at the edges, okay? The edges join the frontier or are based on it, on the mountain and forest region that separates two civic territories and is left to the shepherds, the woodcutters, and the charcoal burners. If we jump to the beginning of the 20th century, we all know about Peter Pan. And J.M. Barrie, who wrote it, he knew very well what was going on in Greek mythology. And he said, Peter Pan is referred to, and this is only someone in England can use these words because I don't use these in everyday conversation. Peter Pan is referred to as betwixt and between. In other words, he's half animal and half human. He's not this and he's not that. Or in Yiddish, nishtahin, nishtaher, okay, which means neither here nor there. What's funny about that Yiddishism is it also, a hin also means a hen, and a hare is a hare. So it actually, this is in a way Pan, right? Half human, half beast, and here we have half rabbit, half rooster. Make up your mind, what are you? But you see, this encourages panic, pandemonium, and confusion. In other words, confusion is a place you want to get to, whereas most modern day thinkers in the West would say, I don't really want to be confused. I want a path, I want a derech. And this is a problem because they are making the idea of confusion and pandemonium a thing that you have to work at in order to get to. So it's really fascinating because perhaps it is so antithetical. And that brings us back to that map. If you remember, let's take a look now in our minds at that map of the Golan Heights. And we have, in the way north, we have Banyas at the edge. Remember, Pan is the god of edges. And at the way south of the Golan Heights, we have Susita. It fits like a glove that they're at the edges. By the way, this kind of reminds us of something that happened in biblical times when King Yeravam, Jeroboam, took over after Solomon, and he wanted to, and the kingdom split up, and there was the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. He prevented people from going during the holidays to Jerusalem. He put guards in the north and the south to prevent people from going. He made new holidays, like we're going to change the dates, and he put a golden calf. And where did he put the golden calves? At the edges, one in Dan, where we know where it is, and the other was in Bethel, at the other edge. It's fascinating when you think about it, that this pagan idea of the edges, of not committing yourself, of being this and that, and being, in the end, everything and nothing at the same time, it's utter confusion, utter pandemonium, and it's something that most of us want to stay away from because we want to have a path. And therefore, this puts this idea of paganism kind of way far away. Let's look at some of the Jewish traditions that have to do with goats. Okay, it's not as though, you know, everything, it's even the idea of sacrificing is so hard for us. I'm guessing, right? How many of us could take a knife and sacrifice a goat? Although usually it wasn't us doing the sacrificing. But here's the classic, most famous goat sacrifice of the year on Yom Kippur, on Har HaBayit, right? We have the high priest, and he's got two goats, and of course, one of them gets sacrificed to God, to Hashem, and the other gets taken and is released in the desert. When the Jewish people were in the desert for 40 years, according to the verse, the literal understanding, the goat was simply left to go and die somewhere in the desert, which is tough, not a simple thing. And at the time of the temple, there was a man who took, for about 10 kilometers on Yom Kippur, would take the goat and shove the goat off of a cliff, which is kind of cruel, not kind of cruel, it's cruel also. This is a famous picture of the scapegoat. And this is the priest, as it were, sending with a special man who's taking it to 10 kilometers and tossing it over. This also is problematic. So how do we deal with that? And how is that different than paganism? So there's a really fascinating idea that is mentioned by Rav Soloveitchik that I just wanted to share. And he talks about the importance, the psychological importance of a person who knows that there's a goat with all the sins of the people of Israel going off into the desert. And he writes the following: there are two different kinds of offerings to Hashem. And of course, this has nothing to do with making one offering to Hashem and another to some other foreign dark force, as some people claim. The two goats are offerings only to Hashem. One is offered to Hashem directly, and the other is offered indirectly. It's led out into the desert. It's as if Hashem is saying to Israel, if you want to be atoned for your sins, if you want to get closer to me, if you want to be holy, this is how to do it. Then he goes on and finishes. The pain felt by someone who sins often comes in transgression itself. Someone ran after riches but became poor. Someone ran after honor but became embarrassed. Someone ran after status but remained frustrated. The goat sent into the desert is a symbol for someone who has sinned because of his own mistakes. And if because of these mistakes he becomes a better person, then his mistakes actually are considered an offering. In other words, let's say that there are holy people who are always thinking holy thoughts. And when they come to Yom Kippur, what do they really have to ask forgiveness from? So those people are symbolized by the goat that gets offered in the temple on the spot, straight to Hashem. But what about the rest of us who make mistakes all the time? And we try to be better, but it's hard for us. And we have Yetzer Hara, we try to get over it, but we don't always succeed. So this goat gives us hope, because this goat going out with all the sins of Israel, as it were. I mean, yes, I wish that there could be a happier ending for this goat, although I'm not sure that eating it is any nicer than throwing it off a cliff, but whatever. It can give us hope, because this means that in the end, because we make embarrassing mistakes, which we can all think of within minutes that we've made in our lives, these will help us actually to be better people. And then in that case, but only retroactively, and in hindsight, our mistakes then become actually mitzvot. But we're always striving to be in control of the Yetzer Hara and trying to be better people. And this, I think, is a big difference. Now, just to make things harder, the word for goat is sa'ir, okay, which means hairy. And sa'ir also has other meanings in Hebrew. It also means demons. I know, that's kind of weird. It also is an owl. It means all kinds of things. So because of this, people have become confused over the centuries and have thought that, yes, even in Judaism, there's black magic and we do things with goats, and it's all simply a misunderstanding of what Sa'ir means in each place in the Tanakh. But it is true that there is a story that is very similar to the Pan story, or a little bit similar to the Pan story and to the Yom Kippur story in the Tanakh that we all know, and that is Esau. Think about it. Esau is born, and it says he was born as a hairy kid, okay? And his brother was such a good little boy, all, not hairy like most babies. And he was wild, and, his actions are kind of like a Pan kind of a guy, because hair and wild hair, the Beatles' haircut in the 1960s and 70s, and because of that, they weren't allowed in Israel, and parents didn't let kids listen to the Beatles because they're going to wear their hair long. Hair is like, ooh, that's a dark area. So this is like, it's as if there's two different goats here. One is Esau and one is Jacob. The idea is that in the end, they both would become good people in the end. There actually is a tradition like that. And fascinatingly enough, the land that was given biblically, according to the Jewish tradition, to Esau is where today's Kingdom of Jordan is, on the other side of the Arava, and it's called Mount Seir, which is pretty fascinating. So it is a similar kind of a story, but obviously we're talking about apples and oranges, or in the case of Yiddishisms, hares and hens. But it is interesting to think about it. I wanted to start coming to an end, but before that, just taking a look at the chats here. Yes, so to answer Ellen, there are two theories of what where the name Pan, what it means. And in many sources, it will say Pan means all, because in that poem written about Hermes, the hymn to Pan, it says that Hermes brought Pan and all the gods were happy. But linguists, of course, I'm not a linguist, but linguists have written that that is a mistake. In other words, there's two competing ideas of what Pan comes from. And Pan also is a root word of an ancient Greek word for flocks and being a shepherd. So it's two ideas, but definitely there is something that this idea of Pan is all encompassing. No question about it. Can we see the map again? I'll go back to that at the end. At the moment, I just want to finish with stories that we tell our kids. Okay, so I'm thinking, I'm a Greek kid. I go to my grandparents and I'm like, can you tell me a story? And they'll say, sure, we got lots of stories in our people. We got Greek mythology. Let's talk about Oedipus here. You know, here's a guy who kills his father. Here it is, right here. And he loves his mother. You know, can you tell Greek mythology stories to your kids, to your grandkids? Of course not. But for those of you like myself who have German grandparents, we were bounced on the knees of our grandparents with a very famous song that all kids and grandkids of German people know. And it goes as follows. It's called Hoppe Hoppe Reite. And if you've had German parents and grandparents, you know this by heart. It's all encompassing to anybody who's connected to German ancestry. And my mother and my grandparents did this to me all the time as a kid. You bounce the kid up on your knees, you say the story, you tell the story of Hoppe Hoppe Reite, and in the end you drop them almost to the ground, but not quite. This is now, of course, when all you care about as a kid is falling, because that's what you're doing it for. But the story is terrible. And it goes like this. Hop, hop goes the rider. When he falls, he'll scream. When he falls into the ditch, the ravens will eat him. When he falls into a swamp, he goes plop. When you say plop, you drop the kid. Now, if you think that's bad, just read Max and Moritz. Anybody seen Max and Moritz? That thing is a horror book. These are stories the Germans have been telling their kids for 100 years. And it's like, I don't, you can go with that. What are the stories we tell our people? You know, this brings us to like, what are our stories? Forget about if it's true or not. What's the classic stories that we tell about our people is really on Pesach at the Seder. Now there's some tough stuff there because we try to tell about what it was like being slavery, and we eat bitter herbs. And yes, babies were killed, and there were the 10 plagues. 10 plagues is not, all the kids know. There were terrible things, but that's about as tough as it gets. But certainly the idea of freedom as the final idea, it's so different than pan-freedom. Pan-freedom says, I want freedom for any urge that I get. And the freedom of the Jewish people was, we left slavery of the Egyptians, and now we're bound in a different way to Hashem. So it's a different kind, I want to say slavery because I don't look at it that way, but it's a commitment, and it's not giving way to your urges. So I think that's important. The stories that we tell our kids, the stories of our people, often reflect where we're trying to go. I want to end with a midrash, which is fascinating, that has to do with two cities in the Decapolis who are very close to each other. One of them is Susita, and the other is Gader, or Gadara, the city that is now in Jordan above Hamat Gader. And it has to do, it's from a midrash relatively like 1,500 years old, 1,400 years old, and it's about one of the 10 commandments that says, do not covet. And this is the story. Gaius of Gader and Locus of Susita would secretly go to each other's wife. One day, a brawl erupted between them and their families. And one son killed his actual father, but was sure that he wasn't his father. Okay, so this is a story that is told about the Greek way of life in the Decapolis. Two people who are so living on the edge that they don't even know who their parents are. And of course, if they feel like going to someone other person's wife, that's your urge. Go with it. Go with do it my way, as they say. And if you feel like having a brawl, go for it. Go with your gut, and things that we say that, this is your hunch, go with it. Okay, and then you get to places where you actually kill your father, like here Oedipus killing his father. And this is a story that happened in Susita. So if we try to sum it up, and this is a picture of Jacob blessing his sons, like the opposite of Oedipus. Somebody thought it would be cute to put himself, that's not me, right? That's somebody else who put himself in there. Kind of cute. But the idea, of course, is, the father figure, the mother figure, super respect, the opposite of what we've just been talking about. So if I would want to sum up, I would say that we learn in a negative way to understand Judaism a little better by seeing the dangers of, the potential dangers of paganism. And monotheism isn't just about praying to one God. It's also about overcoming Yetzer Hara and trying our best, certainly in interpersonal relationships, to be in control in such a way that the good and loving and caring parts of us will rule. Because without that, life would become total pandemonium. So, for those who'd like to see that map, we'll go back to the beginning. One moment. This is the first map. Banyas in the north and Susita in the south. The truth is, we won't know exactly what's going on there until they continue digging, but I believe that in the coming years, we will get a greater picture of what exactly was going on there and how Susita and Banyas have a conversation, I think, with each other, and it's going to take time. The name of the final painting, the final one is Oedipus killing his father. Kind of morbid. It's from Greece somewhere, or Italy. I don't remember.
Mike,
I'm sorry.
the Jacob blessing his sons.
Oh.
Who's the artist?
I don't know. I just grabbed that from the internet because I thought it was cute. I don't know. I'm sorry. I think it's actually a non-Jewish painting, and the guy superimposed himself in there. But I mean, it kind of shows the difference here. So Susita has a lot of secrets in it, and I hope that in the coming years we'll be able to learn more about it. I want to thank Leadnote for the opportunity to talk about Susita, and of course, nothing is like going there and visiting. And so I hope everybody has a safe trip there, and people stay healthy. And Shavuot Tov to everybody. Bye-bye.